Today we are looking at Revelation chapters 17 and 18, where one of the angels introduces Yochanan to an historical woman who is known as Bavel the Great, mother of whores and of earth's obscenities, along with the beast, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. This is a completely new vision that Yochanan is receiving. As with all the previous visions, I suggested that each vision he saw is like a person looking into a kaleidoscope, where the moving shards of glass change the scene. In the same way, the characters in the heavenly visions, while remaining the same people, express varying ways as the scenes change. In the first 11 chapters, the scene developed the role of various characters centered around the throne of God in heaven, with various celestial beings taking on various roles and responsibilities as they related to the overall development of the heavenly throne room scene, while the Lamb opened all 7 seals of the book of Revelation. Then in chapter 12, Yochanan was taken in a vision to see the circumstances surrounding the birth, death, resurrection and ascension of Yeshua, who became known, of course, as the Lamb of God. The second part of chapter 12 defines the battle in heaven, in which Satan, known as the dragon, was thrown out of heaven and confined to the vicinity of the earth from that time forward. Then in chapters 13 through 16, Yochanan was effectively given another kaleidoscope that looked closely at the actions of all the angels who had been given the 7 shofars and others the 7 bowls of God's wrath, which of course were poured out or will be poured out on the earth. The changing scenes that have been revealed in successive chapters have been recorded in a rather random pattern, with the scenes jumping back and forth over the period between Yeshua's return and the ultimate removal of Satan and his cohort from the universe. Now, as we enter into chapters 17 and 18, we see Yochanan is metaphorically handed yet another kaleidoscope. This one shows the changing scenes that are completely different from previous scenes we've had. What Yochanan will see in these 2 chapters is predicated on the development of 2 characters, Bavel the Great and the first of the 2 beasts, who were introduced in earlier chapters. The time frame, which is covered in these 2 chapters, spans a period from the period of the building of the Tower of Bavel in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 10, right through to the current period in which we are now living. So in chapter 17, verse 1, Yochanan says, Then came one of the angels with 7 bowls, and he said to me, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is sitting by many waters. The angel does not define who the whore is, but instead continues by saying in verse 2, The kings of the earth went whoring with her, and the peoples of the earth have become drunk with the wine of her whoring. In verse 3, Yochanan is taken on the visionary journey, saying, He carried me off in the spirit to a desert, and I was shown a woman sitting on a scarlet beast filled with blasphemous names, and having 7 heads and 10 horns. Only in verse 4 does the angel give some clues about the character of the woman in the vision by saying, The woman was dressed in purple, scarlet, and glittered with gold, precious stones and pearls. In her hand was a gold cup filled with the obscenities and filthiness of things produced by her whoring. Then the angel finally introduces her as Bavel the Great, mother of whores and earth's obscenities. She is drunk with the blood of God's people, that is, of the blood of the people who testify about Yeshua. Needless to say, Yochanan is perplexed by what he is seeing, In his own life, he had never seen anything like the woman he is now being shown. So in verse 7, the angel begins to explain to Yochanan the significance of the vision and how the woman interacts with the beast. First, the angel turns his attention to the beast by describing the background and characteristics of the beast, saying in verses 8, the beast you saw once was, now is not, and will come up from the abyss, but it is on its way to destruction. The people living on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life since the founding of the world, will be astounded to see the beast that once was, now is not, but is to appear. This one verse is packed with enigmatic features that define the character of the beast. So let's unpack each of those and see these unique characteristics. The first characteristic to be examined is regarding the presence of the beast. At the time when Yochanan sees the vision, which is 95 CE, just one generation after the destruction of the second temple, he is told that the beast once was, but is not. So, when he receives the vision, the beast was not an entity on earth. It had existed at some time prior to 95 CE, but at that stage it was not evident. However, at some unstated time after Yochanan received the vision, the beast will come up out of the abyss, but will later be finally destroyed. Yochanan is given no specific time frame for what he has seen in relationship to the presence, the absence, and the reappearance of the beast. All he knows is that at some time after the beast has appeared, it will be destroyed. Now, the second characteristic of the beast is that it's an eighth king. In verses 10 through 11, Yochanan describes how the beast is the one that comes after the 7 other kings who have dominated Yahweh's people at various times in history, between the time when Israel became a nation right through to this 21st century. In verse 10, the angel says, 5 have fallen. 1 is now living, and the other is yet to come. But when he does come, he must remain only a little while. The angel does not name those 7 kings, because he said in verse 9, this calls for a mind of wisdom. 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman is sitting. Also they are 7 kings. So applying Yahweh's wisdom to this matter, we must recognize that all 7 kings had impacted God's chosen people Israel at some stage during the time they were a nation. However, the angel does give some clues by saying that 5 had fallen. 1 is living now, and the other is yet to come. Therefore, considering those words in relationship to Israel, we know that before the destruction of the second temple and the removal of Yehudah from Eretz Israel, there had been 5 empires that had dominated Israel. They were Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, all of which had fallen by the time Yochanan received the vision in 95 CE. That matches exactly with what the angel had said. 5 had fallen. Then in 95 CE, Rome was still ruling. As the angel had said, 1 is now living. Then, following the collapse of the western leg of the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire arose. But that did not happen until the collapse of the eastern leg of the Roman Empire. Returning to verse 10, the angel continues by saying about that 7th king, the other has not yet come. When he does come, he must remain for only a little while. After the collapse of the Eastern Roman Empire, which is also known as the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire dominated the territory of Eretz Israel for 400 years, beginning in 1517 CE, until it was also destroyed by the Allied forces in World War I, under the control of General Allenby, who took control of Jerusalem on the 11th of December 1917. As the angel said in the last part of verse 10, when speaking about the seventh king, he must remain a little while. So when we consider the time the Ottoman Empire dominated Eretz Israel was just 400 years, it certainly was a short time when compared with Rome's domination, which lasted nearly 1600 years, or 4 times as long. The third characteristic of the beast is considered in chapter 17, verse 11, where the angel said, "The beast which once was, now is not, is an 8th king. It comes from the 7, and is on its way to destruction." The 8th king, the beast, is said to come from the 7. Now, back in episode 24 of this video series, which I entitled The Great Beast of chapter 13, I looked in detail at what I believe is that 8th king, which is now prominent in the modern world as we know it as the United Nations. In episode 24, I also showed that the 8th king, as the United Nations, is a political body under which most nations of the world, including New Zealand, are now demanding that the State of Israel immediately withdraw from Gaza and work towards the establishment of the two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority. Now, I don't want to spend time looking at the rise of the UN, as those details are all covered in episode 24. Instead, I want to now focus on how I believe the UN, as the beast and the 8th king, will act in the not-too-distant future. In chapter 17, verses 12 through 14, we're told that the 10 horns which the beast are 10 kings who are yet to rule. Again, in episode 24, I listed out what I believe are the 10 kings as being the 10 modern Arabic Gulf states, which were created during the period following on beyond the end of World War I. In verse 14, they will go to war against the Lamb, but are defeated by him, with all those who are called, chosen, and faithful, whom I believe are the 144,000, whom we have also considered in earlier chapters of Revelation. Moving on to verse 14, brings us to the end of the details about the beast. And in verses 15 through 18, the narrative switches back to consider the whore, about whom, in verse 15, it says, "He said to me, the waters you saw where the whore is sitting are peoples, crowds, nations, and languages." This is a rather obscure way of describing the reappearance of the whore, who, along with the beast, have both been hidden from view for many millennia. But as we see, the same 10 kings hate the whore, strip her naked, eat her flesh, and finally consume her with fire. So who or what is the whore? In verse 18, it says, "She is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth." So what does it mean in this modern age? After all, there are only 43 kings remaining in the world today. And yet, there are 193 sovereign nations represented in the United Nations General Assembly. The remaining 150 in the Assembly are ruled by either democratically elected leaders or self-appointed autocrats. However, there are 2 observer bodies that are not actual nations within the United Nations structure. And those two entities are very significant. The first is the Palestinian Authority, which in accordance with international law cannot be considered as a state because it has no recognizable sovereign territory. However, the majority of the members of the nations in the United Nations are presently pushing for a two-state solution with Israel so that the PA can be recognized as a full member state of the General Assembly. The other is the Holy See, more commonly known as Vatican City. As an observer with the General Assembly, it is actively involved in many committees and agencies, but like the PA, the Vatican does not have voting rights. So does that possibly mean that the Vatican is the great city spoken about in Revelation 17 verse 18? The great city that rules over the kings of the earth. In answering that question, it is necessary to look at what Yochanan is shown in chapter 18. However, while looking at that chapter, there is one important feature that we must keep in mind. That is, in chapter 17, verse 17, where Yochanan was told, "For God put it in their hearts," that is, the 10 kings, "to do what will fulfill his purpose, that is, to be of one mind, to give their kingdom to the beast, until God's wrath and God's words have accomplished their intent." So with that in mind, chapter 18 opens in verses 1 through 3 by speaking about how Bavel the Great has fallen and how she has become the home of demons, unclean spirits, and hated birds. Through her unrestrained love of luxury, she has enabled the world's businessmen to grow rich. Also, as a direct result of whoring with her, all the nations have become drunk on the wine of God's fury. Her separation from the ways of God have resulted in her crimes becoming like a sticky mess that has entangled all those who have been whoring with her. Finally, Yochanan hears a voice from heaven saying, "My people, come out of her, so that you do not share in her sins, so that you will not be affected by her plagues." So who are the people who are being warned to depart from her? Remembering 17 verse 17, it is God who is drawing the 10 kings out to bring her to destruction. So those 10 kings are the leaders of the Arabic Gulf states. It makes perfect sense that it would be Israel and all who align themselves with Israel that stand apart from her until God has brought about his anger to fruition. Yahweh appears to be giving a warning before he says in 18 verse 6, "Render to her as she has rendered to others. Pay her back double for what she has done." Then in the next verse, she says in her heart, "I sit a queen. I am no widow. I will never see sorrow." She is blatantly arrogant about her position right to the last hour. But then in verse 8, she is taken down by Yahweh in a single day. Many of the plagues that we have read about earlier in the earlier chapters are being brought to bear upon her. Death, sorrow, famine, and fire, because Yahweh is God and judge of her. The rest of the chapter, verses 9 through 24, is a long lament by the merchants and ship owners and many other people groups who have grown rich through their relationship with the whore. The latter portion of the chapter makes it very clear that having been struck down, she will never rise again. She will be destroyed forever. But up to that point, Yochanan has still not been told in simple language who the whore called Babylon the Great really is. The answer as to who she is lies among the many clues that have been given in both chapters 17 and 18. But only by knowing who she is are we really able to heed the angel's words in 18 verse 4, where he said, "My people, get out of her, so that you do not share with her sins, so that you do not become infected by her plagues." So what are the clues that Yochanan received which can help us to determine the true character and the origin of the woman called Babylon the Great? She rides the beast, who is, we are told, was not visible at the time that Yochanan received the vision in 95 CE. Yet she rides that same beast when he comes to be the 8th king. We also know that the beast did not become the 8th king until the 20th century, because he followed the Ottoman Empire when it was destroyed in 1917. The second determinant, she appears to have influenced all 7 kings or empires as they came and went well before the beast appeared as the 8th king. So she must have been around in some form since before Israel actually became a nation at Mount Horeb after leaving Egypt. The third consideration, Yochanan says in 17:1 that she is sitting by many waters. Then in verse 12, the waters that you saw where the whore is sitting are peoples, crowds, nations, and languages. So from those verses we can see that she has impacted many people groups over a prolonged period. Consideration 4. But what about her title, Bavel the Great? First mention of Bavel in Scripture is at the building of the tower of that same name. It was the one that reached up towards heaven, as recorded in Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 10. So is it possible that she is somehow obtained her title during that era? Little is said in Bereshit about the circumstances surrounding the Tower of Babel, but Josephus helps by filling in many of the gaps through his work on the Jewish antiquities. He gives a full account of the events and personalities related to the construction of the Tower of Bavel. In his account, I believe we find the major clue as to why the whore became known as Bavel the Great. Starting in Bereshit, chapter 10, verse 8 to 10, we see in the scriptures that Cush fathered Nimrod, who was the first powerful ruler on earth. He was the mighty hunter before Yahweh. This is why people say, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before Yahweh, his kingdom began with Bavel in the land of Shinar. Then turning over to chapter 11, in the first 9 verses, we find the account of all the people, of how the people built the tower, which resulted in Yahweh going down and confusing their language, so that they gave up building and scattered all over the earth. Those few verses are all we get from Scripture that tells us about that event during that period. But if we turn to Josephus, we find a more extensive narrative about both the events and the people involved. So rather than quote him verbatim, I will summarize his comments for the sake of brevity. Following the flood of Noah, the people moved towards the plain of Shinar, even though Yahweh God had said in Bereshit 8 verse 20 through 9 verse 1, Noah built an altar to Yahweh. Then he took from every clean animal and every clean bird and offered a burnt offering on the altar. Yahweh smelled the sweet aroma, and Yahweh said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of mankind. Since the imaginations of a person's heart are evil from his youth, nor will I ever again destroy all living things as I have done. So long as the earth exists, sowing time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will not cease. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful, multiply and fill the earth. Then from Josephus, in the Jewish Antiquities chapter 4, we find, first of all, they descended from the mountains into the plains and fixed their habitation there. But many were greatly afraid of the lower grounds on account of the flood. So they were very loath to come down from the high places. The plains in which they first dwelt was called Shinar. They did not obey God's command to spread out and fill the earth. God admonished them again and said to go out in colonies. Instead, they enjoyed the local prosperity without acknowledging that it had been provided by God. They did not obey Yahweh. In their disobedience to the divine will, they failed to send out their separate colonies, fearing that they would be divided and might easily be oppressed. Further, Nimrod provoked them to remain in one place to such an extent that it became an affront and a contempt towards God. As the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, he was a bold man with great strength. He persuaded them not to ascribe anything to God, but rather believe in themselves and their own courage. He also gradually changed the governance into tyranny, turning men from the fear of God. He also stated he would take revenge on God. Hence, he built the tower too high for the waters to be able to reach. He also said that he would avenge himself before God for destroying their forefathers. The multitude were ready to follow the lead of Nimrod, and it was considered cowardice to submit to God. When God saw that they were acting so contemptuously towards him, he resolved to destroy them completely. But he remembered the promise he had made to Noah. He spared them. However, Yahweh withdrew his support and allowed them to exercise their own free will. As they had learned nothing from the flood, Yahweh God divided their languages so that they could not understand one another. The place where they had built the tower is now called Bavel, which in Hebrew means confusion. From that point on, Josephus goes off to describe how the various people groups parted company and settled in new regions surrounding the plain of Shinar and way beyond. So I'll leave his narrative at that point. In establishing what became of the people who remained in Bavel under the leadership of Nimrod, it's necessary to turn to the Babylonian Chronicles. One such legend, entitled Enuma Elish, states that Nimrod had an officer in his army who was married to a beautiful woman. The legend says that a more beautiful woman could not be found, so Nimrod took her away from his captain and married her himself. Her name was Semiramis, who later became known as Ishtar. The legend continues by saying that after the death of Nimrod, Semiramis took control of the people and the governance of the territory, and also established a pagan religion based on sun worship. Sometime after Nimrod's death, she is said to have become pregnant, claiming that a ray of the sun had impregnated her, and that Nimrod himself was being reborn or reincarnated through her. She named his child Nimbus, who became worshipped as a god called Nabu. When he reached adulthood, she married him because, after all, she believed that he was her husband Nimrod reincarnated. Semiramis and her son Nimbus ruled together on the throne of ancient Babylon for a long period, during which time she took on the attributes of Nimrod, becoming a great archer and builder of walled cities. However, she was a savage tyrant, a ruler who stopped at nothing to satisfy her whims. Sometime later, Nimbus could no longer perform his manly duties with her, so she had him killed and continued to rule on her own for many years, and was called the Great Mother of Bavel. Posing as the goddess Ishtar, during her rule she had affairs with many men, among whom was her father-in-law. She also had several of these men put to death. Legend has it that she met Gilgamesh, a Babylonian king from the city of Uruk, and she declared she loved him. Gilgamesh refused her love with the statement that she might have him put to death, as she had many of her other lovers. Her early pagan religion was so well established in ancient Babylon that when God confounded their language at the building of the Tower of Bavel, the religion spread to other parts of the world. Later, that same religion was carried to Egypt, and she reportedly had the role of healer for one of the royal household, and was also helped to establish her religion in that country. While all that was happening, Yahweh, having confused the languages of the people, removed himself from their contemptuous presence and allowed them to spread and develop without guidance and without support. The ultimate outcome was the beginning of pagan or polytheistic religion. Yahweh withdrew completely from supporting mankind until the time when he called Avram from Ur of the Chaldees and took him to the land of Canaan. Much later, Yahweh Zevaot speaks about the whore of Bavel in very disparaging words, as we read earlier in Isaiah chapter 47. The whole chapter speaks about all that Revelation chapter 17 and 18 say will happen to Bavel the Great. Yahweh will finally bring her out of the shadows, and he will expose her and destroy her, just as it has been written in Revelation 17. All the way through history, Yahweh has allowed her to remain hidden. She has been allowed to deceive all the nations that have come and gone. But because of the covenant with Abraham, Israel has been set apart as his chosen people. Only they are spared the wrath that waits for all who've gone whoring with the woman. But even among them, there are many who have willingly turned their backs on their God, so they also will receive the same treatment as the rest of the errant nations. So returning to our earlier question in Revelation chapter 17 verse 18, who is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth? After seeing the origins of Bavel the Great, can Vatican City be the modern outworking of that ancient woman? We now know why Yahweh is extremely angry with the woman. So can we expect in the not too distant future to see the whore, whomever she is, will be stripped naked, burned, and completely destroyed. So in conclusion, I believe Yahweh has laid before us, through the words of chapter 17 and 18, the ultimate choice that must be made by all, whether in this life or in the Olam Haba, the age to come. Yahweh has set before us in these two chapters what is soon to happen in this modern day expression of the world, the woman of Bavel the Great, who, because of the pathway she led through polytheism, that will still soon end in a fiery destruction, so graphically expressed through the words that we read in Isaiah chapter 47. By contrast, the choice of monotheism, as expressed by Yahweh through his Torah, the prophets, and the emissaries, will lead to life eternal in the restored Gan Eden, which was so clearly reflected in today's parashah as we read in Devarim, or Deuteronomy, chapters 4 through 7. The free will choice is being laid before all mankind, who will be resurrected into the restorative 1,000-year reign of Yeshua. Then, in the absence of Satan, all will need to make a free will choice, which will be the ultimate determinant of their future. Will they follow polytheism or monotheism under Yahweh's terms? So until next week, Shabbat Shalom.